The woman on her knees was 75 years old. She wore rubber gloves that were too large for her hands. A stained maintenance cart stood beside her. The smell of bleach hung in the air. One guest walked past without looking at her. Another dropped a paper towel onto the wet floor she had just cleaned. Then the elderly woman lifted her head, and Clara Marlow felt the world stop, because the woman scrubbing a luxury hotel toilet was her mother. The same mother Clara believed had been living comfortably for years. The same mother she had sent money to every month. The same mother who now looked terrified to be seen. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 days earlier, Clara had landed in Philadelphia after nearly 8 years in London. She was 42 years old, successful, respected, and exhausted. Her consulting firm had grown beyond anything she had imagined. She spent her days in boardrooms, airports, and hotels. Most of the time she lived out of suitcases. But through all those years, one thing gave her peace: her mother. Ruth Marlow was 75. Clara believed she was living a quiet life in Pennsylvania. She believed the mortgage had been paid off years ago. She believed her mother spent her mornings tending flowers and her afternoons drinking tea with neighbors. At least that was what everyone kept telling her. Every phone call ended the same way. "I'm fine, sweetheart, don't worry about me, focus on your work." And Clara had listened, partly because she trusted her family, partly because she wanted to believe it. The drive from the airport felt familiar. Gray skies hung low above the highway, bare trees lined the roads. She had not told anyone she was coming, not even Ruth. She wanted it to be a surprise. As her rental car turned onto the street where her mother lived, Clara smiled for the first time that day. Then the smile disappeared. The house looked wrong. The flower beds were gone. The porch furniture was gone. Even the mailbox was different. Clara slowed the car. Maybe she had the wrong address. She checked twice. No, this was the house. A large pickup truck sat in the driveway. A young couple she had never seen before carried groceries through the front door. Confused, Clara parked across the street. For nearly 10 minutes she sat there staring. Finally she walked to the door and knocked. The woman who answered looked friendly enough. "Can I help you?" Clara glanced past her shoulder. "I'm looking for Ruth Marlow." The woman's expression changed. "Oh, she doesn't live here anymore." The words hit harder than Clara expected. "What do you mean she doesn't live here? We bought this place almost 3 years ago." 3 years. Clara felt a cold sensation move through her chest. That couldn't be right. She had been sending money every month. Large amounts. Enough to maintain the house easily. Enough to cover every expense Ruth could possibly have. She thanked the woman and returned to her car. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone. The first call went to her cousin Denise. No answer. The second went to her uncle Martin, straight to voicemail. The third went to Ruth herself. It rang and rang and rang. Nothing. By evening, Clara finally reached Denise. The explanation came quickly. Too quickly. Oh, Aunt Ruth decided to downsize. She wanted something smaller, less responsibility. Everything's fine. Where is she living now? There was a pause. Then another. Clara noticed it immediately. "I'll text you the address." The text never came. The next morning, Clara drove across town searching for answers herself. She checked apartment buildings, senior communities, addresses connected to old Famfalotli records. Nothing. Every conversation seemed to end with the same vague answer. "She's fine, don't worry, everything's handled." By noon, frustration had turned into fear. Then luck intervened, or maybe fate. A former neighbor recognized her outside a grocery store. "Clara?" She turned. Mrs. Hensley, older now, but unmistakable. The woman looked shocked. "Honey, you came back?" "Of course. I'm trying to find Mom." Mrs. Hensley's face tightened. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. "You don't know?" "Know what?" The older woman swallowed. "I thought someone would have told you." "Told me what?" Mrs. Hensley lowered her voice. "Your mother works downtown." "Works? At her age? Where?" The woman hesitated. Then she gave the name of one of the most expensive hotels in Philadelphia. An hour later, Clara walked through its revolving doors, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, guests in designer clothing, a pianist playing softly in the lobby. Nothing about the place felt connected to Ruth Marlow. Then Clara noticed a yellow maintenance cart disappearing around a hallway corner. Something inside her told her to follow it. She walked faster, past conference rooms, past banquet halls, toward the public restrooms. And there, through the open doorway, she saw an elderly woman kneeling beside a toilet with a brush in her hand. Clara stopped breathing. Ruth slowly looked up. Their eyes met. The color drained from Ruth's face. Not shame, not surprise, fear, pure fear. Then Ruth whispered two words that made no sense at all. "Why are you here?" Ruth's face had gone completely pale. For a second, neither woman moved. The noise of the hotel seemed far away. The distant clink of dishes, the hum of air conditioning, the muffled conversations drifting through the hallway. Clara stared at the toilet brush in her mother's hand, at the faded uniform, at the thin rubber gloves. Nothing made sense. Mom Ruth immediately shook her head. "Not here." The words came out fast, almost desperate. She stood up so quickly, she nearly lost her balance. Clara reached for her instinctively, but Ruth stepped back. "Please," Ruth whispered. "Go." Clara felt anger rise inside her. Not at Ruth, at whoever had done this, at whoever had convinced a 75-year-old woman that she needed to hide. No. Ruth looked terrified. "Clara, no, I'm not leaving." Before either of them could say another word, a sharp voice cut through the hallway. "There you are." A man in a dark management suit appeared around the corner. Late 50s, expensive watch, perfect haircut. The kind of man who had spent years giving orders. His eyes landed on Ruth first, then on Clara. His expression hardened. Break time ended 10 minutes ago. Ruth lowered her eyes immediately. Something about that small movement made Clara's stomach twist. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harper." Harper. The name settled into Clara's memory. The manager glanced at Clara. "Can I help you?" The question sounded polite. The tone wasn't. "This is my mother," Clara said. The man's eyebrows lifted slightly. Then he smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Well, that's lovely." His gaze returned to Ruth. "After you're done visiting, those restrooms still need cleaning." Clara took a step forward. "My mother is 75. Harper shrugged, and the answer stunned her. He looked completely unbothered, like he had said something perfectly reasonable. Ruth quickly grabbed Clara's arm. "Please." That one word carried a warning. "Not now, not here." Clara looked at her mother's face, the exhaustion, the fear, the embarrassment. She swallowed her anger for the moment. "Let's go somewhere private," she said. Ruth hesitated, then slowly nodded. 20 minutes later, they sat in a small diner 6 blocks away. The place was nearly empty. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Ruth wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Clara sat across from her, waiting. Finally, Ruth spoke. "You shouldn't have come back." Clara almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it hurt. "I came home to see my mother." Ruth stared down at the table. "I was fine." "No, you weren't." Silence. "You were cleaning toilets." Another silence, longer this time. Then Ruth said something that made Clara's heart sink. "I needed the job." Clara leaned back. "That's impossible." Ruth looked away. "It isn't, Mom. I've been sending money every month." No answer. Thousands of dollars. Still nothing. Where did it go? Ruth's fingers tightened around the coffee cup, and for the first time Clara noticed something else. A tremor. Small. Constant. The hands of someone carrying years of stress. "I don't know," Ruth said quietly. Clara blinked. "What do you mean you don't know? I never saw most of it." The words hung between them. Clara felt cold every month, for years. She had wired money through family accounts because Ruth hated online banking. Denise handled paperwork. Uncle Martin helped with finances. That was the arrangement everyone agreed on, or so she thought. "You never got the money? Sometimes a little, a little?" Ruth nodded. "Not much." Clara sat perfectly still. A terrible possibility was beginning to form. "You knew?" Ruth looked exhausted. "I suspected." "Why didn't you tell me?" The older woman finally looked up. Tears filled her eyes. "Because every time you called, you sounded happy." Clara's throat tightened. "You should have told me. I didn't want to be a burden." The answer hurt even more. A burden. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her thought she was a burden. Clara looked out the window. Rain slid down the glass. For several moments neither woman spoke. Then Clara made a decision. The first real decision since landing in Philadelphia. She pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. "Checking everything." Clara, no. Her voice was calm now, dangerously calm. "If someone stole from you, I'm finding out who." Ruth looked nervous, almost frightened. "Leave it alone." "I'm not leaving it alone." The answer came immediately. because something was wrong, far more wrong than she first thought. Later that afternoon, Clara checked into a hotel downtown, not the luxury one where Ruth worked, a smaller business hotel. She spent hours reviewing bank transfers, wire confirmations, tax records, old emails. By evening, she had a growing folder on her laptop. The numbers were staggering. Over 8 years, she had transferred nearly $600,000. Enough to support Ruth comfortably, enough to maintain a home, enough to prevent her from ever scrubbing floors at 75. Yet somehow Ruth had remained poor. Around 8 o'clock her phone rang. Denise, finally. Clara answered immediately. Her cousin sounded nervous.
Where did the money go?
Silence, a long one. Then Denise laughed weakly. What money? Clara nearly hung up. The money I sent for Mom. More silence. Then Denise said something carefully rehearsed. Aunt Ruth needed a lot of help over the years. Answer the question. Things were complicated. Answer the question. Denise's voice hardened. You've been gone a long time, Clara, so have my bank records. The call ended abruptly. Not by Clara, by Denise, which told her everything. Or almost everything. At 10:30 that night, another email arrived. No sender name, no subject line, just a scanned document attached. Clara stared at the screen. The file contained a property transfer. The house, her mother's house, sold 3 years earlier, not by Ruth, through a power of attorney, signed during a period when Ruth had been hospitalized. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Then she noticed something else. A name, not Denise, not Martin, not anyone she expected. The buyer's representative was listed as Fleming Ashford Holdings, and handwritten across the bottom of the page in red ink, someone had written 6 words. She never agreed to this sale. Clara's breath caught, because beneath that sentence was a second attachment, an old legal document, partially damaged, partially unreadable, but one line remained perfectly clear. Confidential adoption record, beneficiary identity sealed, and directly underneath it was her mother's name, Ruth Marlow. Clara stared at the screen long after midnight. The words did not change. Confidential adoption record, beneficiary identity sealed. Ruth Marlow. She read the page again and again. The document looked old. Some sections were faded. Others had been copied so many times that entire paragraphs were barely visible. Yet it was clearly real. Someone had gone through the trouble of preserving it. Someone had also gone through the trouble of hiding it. Clara immediately downloaded every attachment and saved copies to 3 different locations. Then she printed them in the hotel business center. She had spent too many years in consulting not to recognize a warning when she saw one. Documents did not arrive anonymously at 10:30 at night unless somebody was afraid, or unless somebody wanted a fight. The next morning she called Ruth before sunrise. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring. Clara, you aren't going to work today. A long silence followed. I have to. No, sweetheart, no. The word came out sharper than Clara intended. But she didn't apologize. For 8 years she had trusted everyone else. That ended now. You're taking the day off. I can't. Why again? Silence. Then Ruth said quietly, because people depend on me. Clara closed her eyes. The answer broke her heart. Even now, after everything, Ruth worried about disappointing strangers more than protecting herself. I'll cover whatever shift you're missing. It doesn't work that way. It does today. Ruth sounded tired. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. Like someone who had spent years carrying weight she was never meant to carry alone. Finally, she agreed to meet Clara for breakfast. They chose a small restaurant outside the city, somewhere nobody would recognize them, somewhere family couldn't accidentally walk in. Ruth arrived wearing a plain gray sweater. The hotel uniform was gone. Without it, she looked older. Smaller somehow, but there was also relief in her face, the relief of not having to pretend for a few hours. Clara waited until coffee arrived before placing the printed documents on the table. Ruth froze. The color drained from her face. Where did you get that? So you knew? No. Her answer came too quickly. Then she looked down. Not exactly. Clara leaned forward. Mom, what is this? Ruth stared at the papers for several seconds. Her hands trembled slightly. Finally she whispered, I prayed this would never come back. Those words sent a chill through Clara. Never come back. Not never exist. Not fake, not impossible. Something real. Something buried. What does it mean? Clara asked. Ruth looked toward the window. Cars passed outside. A truck stopped at a red light. Life continued normally while Clara felt like the ground beneath her was shifting. When I was younger, Ruth said carefully, I worked for a law office in Chester County. That surprised Clara. Her mother had never mentioned it. I was an administrative assistant. Why have I never heard about that? Because it wasn't important. The answer sounded practiced, like something repeated for years. Ruth took a sip of coffee, then another. Buying time. There were files. What kind of files? Family disputes, trusts, adoptions, guardianships. The word hung between them. Adoptions. Clara felt her pulse quicken. You were involved? No. The answer came immediately. Not involved. Ruth paused. I just saw things.
Like what?
Another long silence. Then Ruth shook her head. I can't do this, Mom. I can't. Fear appeared in her eyes. Real fear. Not embarrassment. Not guilt. Fear. And suddenly Clara realized something. Ruth wasn't afraid of the truth itself. She was afraid of somebody connected to it. Someone still alive. Someone with power. The realization changed everything. Who are you protecting? Ruth looked away. That was answer enough. The rest of breakfast passed with almost no progress. Every direct question hit an invisible wall. By noon, Clara left more frustrated than before. But she also knew something she hadn't known yesterday. The secret wasn't dead. Someone still cared enough to keep it buried. Back at the hotel, Clara decided to stop guessing. She needed facts, not family stories, not half-truths, facts. She searched the adoption document carefully. Most names had been redacted. Dates were incomplete. But one thing remained readable, a law firm, Whitmore and Gaines, Chester County. The firm no longer existed. It had dissolved almost 20 years earlier. Still, Clara tracked down the attorney who had acquired its archives. A woman named Eleanor Vance, 72 years old, semi-retired, still practicing estate law 3 days a week. By late afternoon, Clara sat across from Eleanor inside a modest office building outside West Chester. The attorney listened carefully. She examined the documents, then her expression changed. You should not have these. Clara's heart skipped. So they're real. Eleanor sighed. Yes. The answer landed heavily. Can you tell me what they mean? Not without authorization. Why? Because sealed records remain sealed. Clara felt her frustration rising. My mother's name is on them. I can see that. Someone stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from her. I understand. Then help me. Eleanor remained silent. For several moments she simply studied Clara's face. Then she asked a question Clara did not expect. How old are you? 42. Eleanor leaned back slowly. Something strange flickered across her expression. Recognition or shock, maybe both. That's impossible, she murmured. What is? But Eleanor seemed distracted. She opened a drawer, removed an old file index, turned several pages, then stopped. Her hand froze. Clara watched the attorney's face lose color. What did you find? Ella looked up. For the first time, genuine concern appeared in her eyes. Ms. Marlow, what? I think someone has been monitoring these records. The room suddenly felt colder. What do you mean? Eleanor closed the index immediately. 3 separate access requests were filed in the past 6 months. Clara frowned. Access requests by who? Eleanor hesitated. Then she pushed the file away. I probably shouldn't tell you this. Tell me. The older woman lowered her voice. Fleming Ashford. The same name. Again, the name from the property sale. The name connected to the anonymous documents. The name she had never heard before arriving home. Clara felt her pulse pounding. Who is Fleming Ashford? Eleanor stared at her. Then something else happened. Something unexpected. The attorney's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. Slowly she reached toward a framed photograph sitting on a shelf behind her desk. A photograph of 3 adults standing outside a large stone estate. She turned it toward Clara. There is another reason this bothers me. Clara looked down. The photograph was old, at least 30 years old. The people were all adults, 2 men, 1 woman. The woman stood in the center. Elegant, confident, dark hair, sharp eyes, and a face that looked so much like Clara's that for a moment she forgot how to breathe. Ella's voice became almost a whisper. Because I've seen that face before. Eleanor's words hung in the air. Because I've seen that face before. Clara looked from the photograph to the attorney, then back to the photograph again. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The woman in the picture wasn't identical to her. Different hairstyle, different age, different expression, but the eyes, the shape of the jaw, the slight curve of the smile. It was enough to make Clara's stomach tighten. Who is she? Clara asked. Eleanor did not answer immediately. Instead, she carefully took the photograph back and set it on her desk. The hesitation worried Clara more than any answer could have. Her name was Vivian Ashford. The name landed heavily. Ashford. Again, everything kept leading back to that name. Related to Fleming Ashford? Eleanor nodded once. His Aunt Clara leaned forward, and she looks like me. Yes, the attorney folded her hands. Enough that it makes me uncomfortable. Silence filled the office. Outside, traffic moved along the wet streets of Westchester. Inside, Clara felt as if invisible threads were slowly tightening around a secret she couldn't yet see. What happened to her? She asked. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Officially, what do you mean officially? Officially, she left Pennsylvania 30 years ago and cut ties with most of the family. And unofficially, the older woman gave a tired smile. Unofficially, wealthy families have a talent for making problems disappear. The answer only deepened the mystery. Before Clara could ask another question, Eleanor's phone rang. The attorney glanced at the screen. Immediately, her expression changed. She rejected the call without answering. A few seconds later, the phone rang again. Same number. Again, she declined it. Clara noticed. Who is that? Eleanor hesitated. Then she answered honestly. Fleming Ashford. A chill ran through Clara. He calls you directly? More often lately. The attorney looked irritated. He becomes interested whenever somebody starts asking questions about old records. Clara's pulse quickened. This was no longer a forgotten family story. Someone was actively protecting it. Someone with money, influence, and apparently enough concern to monitor legal archives. Eleanor stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. After unlocking it, she removed a thin folder. She stared at it for several moments before placing it on the desk. I shouldn't do this. Then why are you? The attorney met her eyes. Because your mother spent 30 years paying for something she didn't do. The statement caught Clara completely off guard. What does that mean? Eleanor immediately shook her head. Not today. Please. No. Her voice was firm. But I can tell you this. She opened the folder. Inside were several photocopies, property records, trust documents, correspondence between attorneys. Most of it meant little to Clara. Then she noticed a date. 30 years ago. The same period connected to the adoption record. The same period connected to Vivian Ashford. The same period somebody had worked so hard to bury. Eleanor pointed to one page. Look at the signature. Clara leaned closer. The document had been signed by Vivian Ashford. Below it sat another signature, Ruth Marlow. Clara froze, her mother's name. Side by side. On the same legal document, the room suddenly felt smaller. My mother knew her. Yes. How well? I don't know. The answer sounded truthful, but incomplete. There are missing files, Eleanor continued. Missing? Entire sections disappeared years ago. How does that happen? The attorney laughed bitterly. It shouldn't. Clara already knew what that meant. Somebody had removed them. Deliberately. The question was why, and what had been inside. By the time Clara left the office, dusk had settled across Chester County. Rain clouds hung low over the roads. Her phone vibrated, a text message. Unknown number, just 7 words. Stop digging before someone gets hurt. Clara stopped walking. The message disappeared a few seconds later, not deleted, unsent. As if whoever sent it suddenly regretted it. She took a screenshot anyway, then another, and emailed both copies to herself. The threat only confirmed what she already suspected. She was getting closer. That evening she drove to the small apartment Ruth rented. It wasn't much, a 1-bedroom unit above a pharmacy, old carpet, thin walls, furniture collected over years rather than purchased together. Yet everything was spotless, everything carefully maintained. Ruth opened the door and immediately knew something had changed. You found something. Clara nodded. Mom, did you know Vivian Ashford? The question hit like a physical blow. Ruth grabbed the edge of a chair. For a moment Clara thought she might fall. Instead she slowly sat down, the silence stretched. Then Ruth whispered one word. Yes, it was the first direct answer she had received. No evasion, no deflection, just yes. Clara sat across from her. How? Ruth looked exhausted. Years seemed to settle onto her shoulders all at once. We worked together at the law office? Ruth nodded. She volunteered there occasionally. Another piece clicked into place. What happened? Fear appeared again. The same fear Clara had seen before. The same fear that didn't belong to old memories. It belonged to something still dangerous. Ruth shook her head. I can't. You can. No, Mom, no. Her voice cracked. For the first time Clara saw tears gathering in her eyes. Not sadness, terror. Then Ruth said something that changed everything. Fleming doesn't know what really happened. Clara felt her heart stop. Excuse me, he thinks he does? Mom, what are you talking about? Ruth pressed both hands against her face. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red. He thinks Vivian abandoned everyone. And she didn't? No, the answer came immediately, with absolute certainty. Clara leaned forward. Then what happened? Ruth opened her mouth, then closed it again, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, unable to step forward, unable to step back. Finally she stood. Without another word, she walked to a closet near the hallway. She reached into the very back, behind blankets, behind storage boxes, behind years of ordinary life, and pulled out a small metal lockbox. The box looked old, very old. Ruth carried it carefully, almost reverently, then placed it on the kitchen table. Her hands trembled, not from what was inside. I promised I would never open this again. Clara stared at the box. The metal surface was scratched and worn. A faded label remained attached to the lid. Only a few words were still readable. Property of V. Ashford. Ruth slowly reached into her sweater pocket, removed a small key. And before she could insert it into the lock, someone began pounding violently on the apartment door. Both women jumped. Another knock followed, harder this time. Then a man's voice echoed through the apartment. Mrs. Marlow. Silence. The voice came again, cold, controlled, dangerously calm. I know Clara is inside. Ruth's face went white, because she recognized the voice immediately. Fleming Ashford had found them. The pounding continued. 3 hard knocks, then silence. Ruth sat frozen beside the kitchen table. The small key remained trapped between her fingers. Clara had never seen fear like this in her mother's face. Not fear of embarrassment, not fear of losing money, fear of a person. That realization made Clara stand immediately. Don't answer it. Ruth's voice came out barely above a whisper. He won't leave. Then let him stand out there all night. Another knock echoed through the apartment. Fleming's voice followed. Mrs. Marlow, we need to talk. Clara walked to the door but stopped several feet away. She wasn't about to open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked through the peephole. A man in his early 60s stood in the hallway wearing an expensive charcoal coat. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed. Like someone who expected doors to open when he arrived. Like someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. He wasn't alone. A younger man in a dark suit stood near the elevator. Lawyer, security, assistant. Clara couldn't tell, but he was definitely there for a reason. She stepped back from the door. How did he know where you live? Ruth lowered her eyes. He always knows. The answer disturbed Clara more than she expected. Always. Not today, not recently. Always. That meant years, maybe decades. The knocking stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Clara's phone vibrated. Unknown number. A text message. Open the door. We can solve this peacefully. Clara stared at it, then deleted it. Another message arrived immediately. You have documents that do not belong to you. A third followed. Ask Ruth what happened to Vivian. The room suddenly felt colder. Clara looked up. Her mother had seen the change in her expression. What did he say? Clara hesitated, then showed her the screen. Ruth's face drained of color. He knows about the box. How? Ruth didn't answer, and that was answer enough. Somebody had been watching. Maybe not tonight, maybe not directly, but somehow information kept reaching Fleming. The realization made Clara move fast. She grabbed her laptop, opened the camera app, and photographed every document on the table, every page, every signature, every note. Then she uploaded everything to secure cloud storage. Ruth watched silently. What are you doing? Making sure nobody can make this disappear. For the first time all evening, something almost like pride appeared in Ruth's eyes. Very small, very brief. But Clara saw it. Outside, footsteps moved away from the apartment door. A moment later, the elevator dinged. Fleming was gone, at least for now. The tension inside the room remained. Neither woman touched the lockbox for several minutes. Finally, Clara sat back down. Tell me the truth. Ruth stared at the box, then slowly nodded. Not all of it. Why not? Because some of it isn't mine to tell. The answer frustrated Clara. But she recognized something important. This was the closest Ruth had come to opening the door herself. Pushing harder now might make her retreat again. So Clara waited. Eventually Ruth took a deep breath. Vivian wasn't what people said she was. Clara remained silent, listening. Everyone remembers the Ashfords as powerful. They were. Everyone remembers Fleming's father as the respectable one. Ruth laughed bitterly. There are many things people remember incorrectly. Another piece. Not enough, but another piece. Ruth looked toward the window. Rain had started again, softly tapping against the glass. I met Vivian when we were both adults. She smiled faintly. She was brave. The word surprised Clara. Brave wasn't usually how wealthy socialites were described. She volunteered at legal aid clinics. Ruth continued. She spent time helping people her family didn't even notice. That sounded nothing like the image Clara had been building. She wanted to change things. Change what? The way her family handled problems. A pause. The way they buried them. Clara's pulse quickened. Buried what? Ruth looked away again. Not completely, but enough. Then she reached for the lockbox. The key slid into the lock. A quiet click followed. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Slowly she opened the lid. Inside were several items, a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, a legal folder, a small jewelry box, and a photograph. Clara immediately noticed the photograph. Not because of who was in it, because of who wasn't. Only two women appeared in the picture, Ruth and Vivian, both adults, both smiling, standing in front of a stone estate. Friends, real friends, not acquaintances, not co-workers. Friends. The image changed everything. Ruth handed it to her carefully. Keep that. Why? Because somebody spent years trying to destroy every copy. Clara stared at her. Years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. Then she opened the legal folder. Several documents sat inside. Most were old correspondence. Property records. Letters between attorneys. Then one page caught her eye. It was labeled, Private Family Trust Amendment. The document had multiple signatures. Several names were blacked out, but one remained visible. Vivian Ashford. Another visible line stopped Clara cold. Contingent beneficiary to be identified through independent verification. What does that mean? Ruth's expression became complicated. Hope, fear, grief all at once. It means Vivian knew something might happen. Happen to who? To her. The room fell silent. Clara carefully turned the page. A second document waited underneath. Older, more damaged. A handwritten note attached to the front. The handwriting belonged to Vivian. Even Clara could tell. The note contained only one sentence. If this is being opened, then they finally found her. Clara's heart began pounding. Her, not an estate, not a company, a person, an adult woman, someone hidden, someone missing, someone important enough for a wealthy family to erase, and someone Vivian had expected would eventually be found. What does this mean? Clara whispered. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. For a moment Clara thought she would finally explain everything. Instead, Ruth looked toward the apartment door, toward the hallway, toward the world outside. Then she said something even more shocking. Fleming isn't the one you should be afraid of. The words hung in the room. Clara stared at her. If not Fleming, Ruth's voice broke. Then the person who never wanted Vivian's secret to survive. Before Clara could ask who that was, her phone rang. Both women jumped. The caller ID showed a name she recognized immediately. Eleanor Vance, Clara answered. The attorney sounded breathless, almost frightened. Listen carefully. What happened? They opened one of the sealed archive vaults tonight. Clara's stomach dropped. Who did? I don't know yet. A pause. Then Eleanor spoke the words that made the blood drain from Clara's face. They removed the only surviving DNA authorization file connected to Vivian Ashford. Clara tightened her grip on the phone. The DNA authorization file was removed, she repeated. Across the room, Ruth had gone completely still. Eleanor's voice sounded strained. Not copied, not reviewed. Removed. Who had access? We don't know yet. You said somebody opened the archive. They used valid credentials. Clara immediately understood why that was bad. Whoever had done it wasn't some random thief. It was someone who knew the system. Someone who understood exactly which file mattered. Eleanor lowered her voice. Listen carefully. If there was a DNA authorization, then someone expected identity verification at some point. Clara looked at the trust amendment on the table. The words suddenly carried a different weight. Contingent beneficiary to be identified through independent verification. The same idea, the same preparation. Someone had planned for a future discovery. Someone had expected the truth to survive. Eleanor, Clara said carefully, Are you telling me Virgin created a legal path to identify someone? A long silence followed. Then the attorney answered, That's exactly what I'm telling you. The call ended a few minutes later. Neither Clara nor Ruth spoke immediately. Rain continued tapping against the apartment windows. The lockbox remained open between them. For the first time since returning to Pennsylvania, Clara felt the shape of the mystery becoming clearer, not solved, just clearer. Vivian had expected somebody to be found. A trust amendment existed, a DNA authorization file existed, and somebody was now trying to erase both. The question was no longer whether a secret existed. The question was who that secret belonged to. Finally, Clara looked at Ruth. Am I the person Vivian was trying to identify? Ruth closed her eyes. The pain on her face answered before her words did. I don't know. Clara stared at her. You don't know? I know pieces. Then tell me the pieces. Ruth nodded slowly. For once, she didn't retreat. 30 years of silence seemed to be exhausting her. I met Vivian during the worst period of her life. The older woman looked at the photograph lying on the table. She trusted the wrong people. Who? Her family. The answer came immediately, without hesitation, without doubt. Ruth took a shaky breath. There was a dispute involving family money, an inheritance? Partly. Then what else? Ruth hesitated. Then she answered, identity. The word landed heavily. Identity. Not money, not property, identity. Clara's pulse quickened. Whose identity? Ruth stared at the table. That's the part I was never told. The frustration returned immediately, but Clara could see Ruth wasn't lying. There were things she genuinely didn't know, or had never been allowed to know. Then Ruth reached deeper into the lockbox. Beneath the letters sat a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. The paper looked fragile. Vivian's handwriting covered the front. Ruth held it carefully. I never opened this. Clara frowned. You've had it for 30 years, I promised her. The answer sounded absurd, and yet somehow believable. Because Ruth had spent decades carrying burdens that belonged to other people. What if the answer is inside? Ruth stared at the envelope. Her hands trembled. Then she slowly passed it across the table. You open it. For a moment neither woman moved. The envelope represented 3 decades of fear, 3 decades of silence, 3 decades of consequences. Clara carefully broke the seal. Inside sat several folded pages and a photograph. She unfolded the first sheet, a handwritten letter. The ink had faded but remained readable. The first line made her breath catch. If this letter is being read, then I was right not to trust them. The room became silent. Clara continued reading. The letter never mentioned children, never mentioned births, never mentioned anything forbidden or sensational. Instead, it described legal pressure, family coercion, threats, manipulation. Vivian wrote about being watched, about relatives trying to control records, about evidence disappearing, about not knowing whom she could trust. The more Clara read, the more one thing became clear. Vivian had been afraid, genuinely afraid, not of losing money, of losing the truth. Halfway down the second page, a name appeared, Richard Ashford. Clara had never heard it before, but Ruth reacted instantly. Her face hardened, a flash of anger crossed it, real anger, the kind that survives decades. Who is Richard? Ruth looked sick. Fleming's father. Everything stopped. The room seemed to shrink. The missing files, the property sale, the intimidation, the stolen money, the threats. Suddenly they all had roots, deeper roots than Fleming, much deeper. Clara returned to the letter. Near the end, Vivian wrote something else. A sentence underlined twice. If anything happens to me, the verification file must remain separate from the trust records. Clara looked up immediately. The DNA file. Ruth nodded. The one Eleanor mentioned. The realization hit them both at the same time. Someone hadn't just removed a random document. They had removed the exact file Vivian considered critical, which meant whoever took it understood its significance, and had likely understood it for years. Then Clara reached for the photograph enclosed with the letter. At first glance it looked ordinary. 3 adults standing outside Ashford Estate, Vivian. A man Clara didn't recognize and a woman. The moment Clara saw the woman, she froze, not because the woman looked like her, that part she expected now, no. It was because she looked like Ruth. Not exactly, the same eyes, the same cheekbones, the same smile, older perhaps, different hairstyle yet unmistakably similar. Ruth leaned forward. Her face lost all color. No, the word barely escaped her lips. Clara turned the photo around. You know her? Ruth didn't answer. She couldn't. Tears filled her eyes. Then she whispered a name. Evelyn. Who's Evelyn? The older woman stared at the photograph as if seeing a ghost. I haven't heard that name in 30 years. Clara's pulse raced. Who was she? Ruth slowly shook her head. No. What? This can't be right. The fear had returned. But now it was mixed with something else, recognition, a memory, something Ruth had buried long ago. Then Clara noticed writing on the back of the photograph, very faint, almost invisible. She turned it toward the light. The handwriting matched Vivian's. 3 names were listed beneath the image: Vivian Ashford, Evelyn Carter, and the third name. Clara stared. Read it again, then a third time, because she was certain she must be mistaken, but she wasn't. The final name written beneath the photograph was Ruth Marlow, and next to all 3 names, Vivian had written 4 chilling words: only one still knows. The words sat between them like a weight. Only one still knows. Clara looked from the photograph to Ruth, then back again. The image had suddenly become something more than a memory. It was evidence, proof. Vivian had known exactly who held the truth when she wrote those words, and according to the photograph, that person was Ruth. For several long seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Clara quietly asked, "What do you know?" Ruth stared at the picture. The years seemed to settle over her all at once. "I know enough to understand why people are still afraid." "People like Fleming?" "No," the answer came instantly. Again, the same answer, not Fleming, someone else, someone higher, someone more dangerous. Clara felt her frustration rising. Every answer revealed a little more and hid a little more. The mystery was narrowing. But it wasn't opening, it was tightening. Finally, Ruth reached for the photograph. Her fingers brushed across Vivian's face. A gesture so familiar and gentle that Clara immediately understood something. Ruth had loved her friend. Not romantically, not dramatically, but deeply. The kind of friendship that survives decades. The kind that leaves scars. "Vivian trusted me," Ruth said. "With what?" Ruth swallowed. "With proof." The word hit hard. Proof, not rumors, not suspicions. Proof. Clara sat forward. Proof of what? Ruth's eyes filled with tears. That someone had lied. The apartment fell silent. A lie. 30 years. Destroyed records, threats, missing files. Everything suddenly revolved around that single word. Lie. "Who lied?" Clara asked. Ruth shook her head. "I'm not ready." Clara closed her eyes briefly. The answer hurt, but she could see something changing. The wall wasn't as solid anymore. Cracks were appearing. Eventually the truth would come through. The question was whether they would reach it before someone destroyed what remained. The next morning, Clara woke after only a few hours of sleep. Her phone already contained 2 missed calls from Eleanor, a voicemail, and another message from an unknown number. "Stop now," nothing else. No threat, no signature, just those 2 words. They were somehow more disturbing than anything aggressive, because they sounded desperate. Clara called Eleanor immediately. The attorney answered before the second ring. "I found something." Clara sat upright. "What?" The DNA authorization wasn't the only file removed. A pause. Then Eleanor continued. "Someone accessed the trust records too." Clara's pulse quickened. "The trust amendment?" "Yes." "What did they take?" "We don't know yet." The uncertainty bothered Eleanor almost as much as it bothered Clara. Because neither woman was dealing with random theft anymore. Someone knew exactly which records mattered, and exactly where to find them. Eleanor lowered her voice. "I also contacted a forensic record specialist." "You can do that? For old estate disputes?" "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "They found evidence of alteration." Clara froze. Alteration, pages removed, references deleted. Entire names erased from archived copies. The room seemed colder. Can they recover them? Possibly. Not certainty. Possibly. But it was enough. It meant the truth hadn't disappeared completely. Later that afternoon, Clara drove back to Chester County, not to see Eleanor, not to see Fleming, to see Ashford Estate. For days she had been hearing about it, reading about it, looking at photographs. Now she wanted to stand in front of it herself. The property sat behind old iron gates, massive stone walls, ancient oak trees, the kind of place built to survive generations, the kind of place wealthy families used to protect their secrets. Clara parked along the road and stared. Something about the estate felt familiar, not recognizable, just familiar, like a memory she couldn't reach, which made no sense. She had never been there, at least not that she remembered. As she stood near the gate, a voice startled her. "You shouldn't be here." Clara turned. An elderly groundskeeper stood several yards away, late 70s, weathered face, work gloves, the kind of man who had spent his entire life outdoors. "I'm just looking." The man studied her carefully. Then his expression changed. A subtle shift, recognition, the same thing Eleanor had shown, the same thing Vivian's photograph had triggered. You know me? Clara asked. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed his cap. You look like somebody. Her heartbeat accelerated. Who? The groundskeeper looked toward the estate, toward the windows, toward the past, then back at Clara, someone who disappeared. The words sent a chill through her. Vivian? His eyes widened. That reaction told her everything. He knew the name, he knew the story, at least part of it. Before Clara could ask another question, a black SUV turned into the driveway. The groundskeeper's expression immediately hardened. Fear, real fear. He stepped backward. You need to leave. Wait, you need to leave now. The vehicle continued approaching. Dark windows, expensive, deliberate. The groundskeeper lowered his voice. If they see us talking, I'll lose everything. Then he turned and walked away, fast, without looking back. Clara remained standing by the gate. The SUV stopped 30 feet away. The rear passenger door opened. Fleming Ashford stepped out. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect control. Yet for the first time since meeting him, Clara noticed something new. He looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying pressure he couldn't escape. He approached slowly. I was hoping we could speak. Clara laughed. After stalking my mother? Fleming ignored the accusation. His attention shifted briefly toward the estate, then back to Clara. You've been told a lot of things, and you've hidden even more. A flicker crossed his face. Pain, gone almost instantly. You don't understand what you're involved in. There it is. What? The warning. Fleming exhaled heavily. For several seconds he simply stood there. Then he said something Clara never expected. I'm trying to protect someone. The statement hit her like a slap. Protect someone. Not himself. Someone. The wording mattered. Clara immediately noticed it. Who? Fleming looked away, toward the mansion, toward the upper windows, toward a specific section of the estate. When he finally answered, his voice had become quieter. Someone who never wanted to be found. Clara's heart began pounding, because for the first time, his fear looked genuine. Not fear of losing money. Not fear of scandal. Fear of what would happen if the truth emerged. Then Fleming reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded document, and handed it to her. It's your choice what you do next. Clara unfolded it. The paper was old, official, partially damaged, a copy of a court filing. Most of the text was unreadable. But one section remained perfectly clear. Petition for legal change of identity approved, and beneath it sat a name she had never seen before. Not Vivian Ashford, not Ruth Marlow, not Evelyn Carter. The final line read original or identity sealed permanently by court order, and directly underneath was a signature, Richard Ashford. Clara stared at the court filing. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. Original identity sealed permanently by court order, Richard Ashford. The signature seemed to burn into the page. When she looked up, Fleming was watching her carefully, not triumphantly, not aggressively, almost cautiously, as if he had spent years waiting for someone else to see what he had seen. Why are you showing me this? Clara asked. Fleming glanced toward the estate. Because you're asking the wrong questions. Then give me the right ones. A faint smile appeared. Tired, bitter, I've been trying. Clara folded the document. That's hard to believe. It should be. The honesty surprised her. Most people in his position would defend themselves. Fleming didn't. Instead, he looked like a man carrying a burden he hated. A burden he couldn't put down. You think I'm your enemy, aren't you? His answer took several seconds. No. The word came quietly, and somehow that made it more unsettling. Because Clara believed him, not completely, but enough to be uncomfortable. Fleming sighed. My father destroyed lives. The admission arrived without warning, without excuses, without qualifications. Clara said nothing. Richard was obsessed with reputation. Fleming continued staring toward the mansion. Control mattered more to him than people. The statement sounded practiced, repeated, lived. Then why protect him now? I'm not, again, immediate, certain. The conversation was changing. For the first time, Clara felt she wasn't speaking to an adversary. She was speaking to someone trapped inside the same story, just on a different side of it. If you're not protecting him, she said, who are you protecting? Fleming looked directly at her, someone who suffered because of him. The answer hit hard, because it sounded sincere. Before Clara could ask more, his phone rang. He checked the screen. His expression immediately darkened, then he ended the call. Not declined, ended. Like someone refusing a command. A second call followed. Same reaction. By the third call, Clara noticed something new. Fleming looked nervous, genuinely nervous. The realization sent a chill through her, because powerful men usually made other people afraid. They weren't usually the frightened ones. I have to go. Wait. He stopped. Clara held up the court document. Who changed their identity? A long silence followed. Then Fleming answered. I don't know. She almost laughed. That's ridiculous. I know. Then why carry this around? His jaw tightened. Because it was hidden in my father's private records. Now she froze. Private records, not public archives, not court files, private records. How many documents did he hide? Fleming's expression answered before Kopsk. Too many. Then he walked back toward the SUV. A few seconds later he was gone, leaving Clara standing alone outside the gates, with more questions than answers, and one disturbing realization: someone was pressuring Fleming too. That evening she returned to Ruth's apartment. The moment she entered she knew something had changed. The lockbox sat open on the kitchen table, letters everywhere, photographs, documents. Ruth had been working. Really working. For the first time since Clara arrived home, her mother wasn't hiding, she was searching. The sight alone almost made Clara emotional. Ruth looked exhausted, but determined. I found something. Clara sat immediately. What? Ruth handed her a letter. Not Vivian's handwriting, not Richard's, someone else's. The date was 29 years old. The paper had yellowed, but the ink remained clear. Clara began reading. Halfway down the page she stopped, then read the same paragraph again and again, because she wasn't sure she understood. The letter described a meeting, a legal meeting. Several members of the Ashford family had attended. So had attorneys, so had accountants. The purpose wasn't inheritance, it wasn't property, it wasn't money. The purpose was determining whether someone should legally remain an Ashford. Clara slowly lowered the paper. What does that mean? Ruth rubbed her temples. It means there were questions. Questions about what? The older woman hesitated, then finally said it. Blood. The room became silent. Not inheritance, not adoption. Blood, family identity itself. Everything suddenly shifted. The mystery wasn't about who received money. It wasn't even about who inherited the estate. It was about who belonged, who didn't, and who had the power to decide. Clara picked up another document, then another. Patterns emerged. References to medical records, private investigators, legal consultations. DNA technology was still primitive back then. But the concern was obvious. Someone had doubted something. Someone had wanted proof. Someone had feared the answer. Then Clara found a name. Evelyn Carter, again, this time alongside another note. Subject refuses settlement. The words sent a chill through her. Settlement. People only offered settlements when they wanted problems to disappear. What happened to Evelyn? Ruth stared at the table. For a moment, Clara thought she wouldn't answer. Then she did. She vanished. The simplicity of the statement made it worse. Vanished how? No one knows. Clara immediately knew that wasn't entirely true. People rarely vanished without traces. Someone always knew something. The question was who, and why they stayed silent. Hours passed. Documents covered nearly every surface in the apartment. Clara scanned everything, uploaded everything, created backups, 3 different locations. She wasn't taking chances anymore. Around midnight her phone buzzed. Eleanor. The attorney sounded exhausted. I have an update. Clara sat upright. What happened? The forensic specialist recovered fragments from one of the altered archive pages. Her heartbeat accelerated. And? They found part of a name. The room went completely quiet. Years of secrecy, missing records, destroyed files, and finally something concrete. What name? A pause. Then Eleanor spoke carefully. As far as we can tell, the erased identity and Evelyn Carter appeared in the same document. Clara glanced toward Ruth. Her mother had gone pale. What else? Another pause. Longer this time. Evelyn wasn't listed as a witness. Clara's pulse pounded. Then what was she? The attorney exhaled slowly. When she finally answered, her voice sounded shaken. She was listed as the biological relative selected for future DNA verification. The words hit like a thunderclap. Clara froze. Across the table, Ruth closed her eyes, because suddenly the missing DNA file made terrifying sense. The verification wasn't meant for an estate. It wasn't meant for a lawsuit. It was meant for a person. Someone whose identity had been buried so deeply that even the court records had been altered. Then Eleanor said one final thing. A sentence that changed everything. The recovered page also contained a handwritten note. Clara gripped the phone tighter. What note? The attorney's voice dropped almost to a whisper. It said, "If Evelyn disappears, find Clara Marlow." The room remained silent after Eleanor's words. "If Evelyn disappears, find Clara Marlow." Clara sat motionless, staring at nothing. For days she had been chasing fragments, photographs, legal records, missing files, half-finished confessions. Now, for the first time, the secret had pointed directly at her. Not indirectly, not symbolically, directly. Ruth slowly lowered herself into a chair. She looked exhausted. Not because she was 75, because she had carried this truth alone for 30 years. "I know who Evelyn was," she finally said. Clara turned toward her. The words felt almost unreal. After all this time, after all the fear. Ruth looked at the photograph again, then at Vivian, then at Clara. Evelyn was Vivian's older sister. The answer landed hard. Not a friend. Not an employee, family. Richard hated her. Why? Because she challenged him. Ruth's voice shook slightly. He controlled the company, the estate, the family narrative. The phrase caught Clara's attention. Family narrative, not family, narrative. The story people were allowed to believe. Evelyn discovered financial misconduct. Ruth continued hidden transfers, fraud, money moved through trusts. Pieces began falling into place. The missing records, the altered archives, the pressure, the threats. Richard hadn't been protecting a reputation, he had been protecting himself. Vivian helped her gather evidence. Ruth looked down. They planned to expose everything. Clara already knew what came next, or thought she did, but she was wrong. Evelyn disappeared before they could. The apartment grew quiet, not dead, not murdered, disappeared. A grown woman with evidence against one of the most powerful men in the county had simply vanished, and no one had ever publicly explained it. "Then why me?" Clara asked. Ruth closed her eyes, because this was the part she feared most. When Evelyn disappeared, Vivian found something among her private papers. Clara waited. Ruth reached into the lockbox and removed one final envelope. The last one, still sealed. Vivian's handwriting covered the front. For Ruth Marlow, only if everything else fails. Ruth carefully opened it. Inside sat several pages, a notarized affidavit, a private letter, and a laboratory report, old, yellowed, but official. Clara felt her pulse racing as Ruth handed it over. The laboratory report wasn't a modern DNA test. It was an earlier biological verification study later preserved with supporting records. Years later, those records had been referenced when modern DNA authorization procedures were established. Clara read every line. Then she stopped. Then she read it again. Because she couldn't believe it. The report confirmed a biological relationship, not between Clara and Vivian, not between Clara and Richard, between Clara and Evelyn Carter. The room seemed to tilt. Evelyn, the missing woman, the woman everyone had spent decades trying to erase, the woman whose name kept appearing beside hers, the woman who had disappeared before exposing Richard. Clara looked up slowly. "You're saying Evelyn was my mother?" Ruth nodded. Tears filled her eyes. Yes. For a moment Clara couldn't speak. All those years, all those questions, all those missing records. The answer had never been about money. It had never been about inheritance. It had been about identity. Richard had known that if Evelyn's relationship to Clara was ever verified, questions would follow. Questions about why Evelyn disappeared. Questions about what she knew. Questions about who benefited from her silence. And those were exactly the questions he never wanted asked. "But you raised me." The words came out softly. Ruth's face broke. "I did. You knew? I learned the truth years after Evelyn vanished." Her voice cracked. "Vivian found me. She trusted me. She knew I wouldn't sell it, wouldn't bury it." Ruth wiped her eyes. "She asked me to protect the documents if something happened to her." And Vivian? Gone within 2 years. The loss hung heavily between them. Not vanished, not officially, but gone. Another truth buried beneath money and power. For the next several months, the pieces finally came together. The forensic specialists recovered enough altered records to establish a pattern of tampering. Investigators traced unauthorized archive access. Several hidden trust transactions linked back to Richard Ashford's estate administration. The county never produced every answer. Some secrets had died with the people who carried them, but enough surfaced, enough to expose the manipulation, enough to restore names that had been erased, enough to return the truth to the public record. Fleming Ashford surprised everyone, including Clara. He cooperated. Fully, he surrendered private files, personal correspondence, internal estate records. When reporters contacted him, he made no excuses. He publicly acknowledged what his father had done, not because it erased the damage, because it didn't, but because continuing the lie would have made him part of it. The stolen funds connected to Ruth's property sale were eventually recovered through civil proceedings. Not overnight, not easily, but legally. The house itself was gone. That couldn't be undone, some losses never could. But Ruth never cleaned another hotel restroom again. That mattered. Months later, Clara stood beside a new memorial plaque installed at a legal aid center in Chester County. 3 names appeared together: Vivian Ashford, Evelyn Carter, Ruth Marlow. Women who had refused to disappear completely. Women whose stories survived because someone protected the truth long enough for it to be found. Reporters asked Clara whether she felt anger, whether she felt relief, whether she finally felt complete. She thought about the question for a long moment, then looked toward Ruth standing nearby, her mother. Not by blood, by choice, by sacrifice, by 30 years of showing up. The answer became simple. The truth gave me my history, Clara said, but Ruth gave me my life. That evening they sat together on a small porch outside Ruth's new home. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful. The kind of peace neither woman had known for a very long time. The sun disappeared beyond the trees. Neither felt the need to fill the silence. Some wounds remained. Some questions would never receive perfect answers. But the fear was gone. The hiding was over. And for the first time in decades, the truth belonged to the people who deserved it. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below. And if you believe dignity and truth are worth protecting, we'd love to hear where you stand before we meet again in the next story.